If you've been collecting LPS at all within the past, let's say, 6 months, you already know the LPS market is absolutely god-awful. LPS have been steadily and then exponentially increasing for the past few years, and I feel like now we're hitting a sort of boiling point. That's what this video is about. I realize I'm definitely not the first person to talk about this on LPSTube, probably not the most qualified either, as I'm a pretty casual collector with a very limited understanding of LPS rarity and value, but in a way I think that gives me a different perspective that might be useful or at least interesting. Or maybe not, who knows? And there are a few things I want to mention that I haven't seen talked about by other people covering this topic. I also think it's still worth me making a video on this regardless, just to add to the voices if nothing else. Some LPS have always been expensive for no justifiable reason. Think your Savannah Reeds and 909s. But recently, even the most seemingly innocuous pets are becoming less and less affordable. Pets that used to be $5 are now $8. Or $30. Lots that would have been $20 are now $40. Or $100. In order to find good deals, you have to spend ages searching through a sea of awful ones, and sometimes there aren't even any good deals to be found. But why are prices so much worse now than they were a few years ago? The shorter answer is that there's been a large increase in demand, but no increase in supply. G7 doesn't count here. But the long answer, I believe, has a few more moving parts. Please keep in mind that a lot of this is my personal speculation/beliefs rather than hard facts, so take this whole thing with a grain of salt. This video is also really just covering the state of the United States LPS market specifically. First of all, where did this increase in demand come from? From what I've seen, it came around the time G7 was first showing up in stores in early 2024, which makes a lot of sense. The reboot got a lot of people back into LPS. A while before that, there was also a smaller resurgence because of, to my understanding, 2000s nostalgia being in trend. That messed with things as well, and it sucked, but it was nothing compared to this. The thing about a lot of these new/returning collectors from both G7 and the 2000s nostalgia thing is that they're mainly young adults and older teenagers. A lot of them have jobs and disposable income, and therefore can afford to pay decent money for the LPS that they want. The other thing about these collectors, and this is just an assumption from me, is that by virtue of being new to the community, they might not have a good grasp on what reasonable LPS prices look like, especially if they joined within the last few months. I can look at $16.95 listings on eBay and know that the prices are BS, but if I were looking at them now without context, I would have no idea that she was being sold for only $40 pretty frickin' recently. I feel like a lot of these people are paying these ridiculous prices simply because they don't fully realize they're being ripped off. On the other side of the spectrum, there seems to have been a pretty big increase in discussion of LPS rarity in the collector community over the past few years. Very important to keep in mind that this is very much an outsider perspective here, as I'm not really active in collector spaces. These are just my secondhand observations. Back in the day, I believe the general consensus regarding rarity in a lot of LPS spaces was that common was basically synonymous with unpopular. A monkey was worth nothing because it was a monkey. A dachshund was worth a ton because it was a dachshund. The main unpopular LPS people had any idea were rare were the handful of pets LPS Hannah mentioned in her Rarest LPS Ever series, which was not that comprehensive. That's how I remember it, at least. I was young at the time, but I think what I said was true for many people. Lately, however, the general view of rarity has changed. There are a lot more educated, so to speak, people in the community who have an actual understanding of what pets are rare and why. I'm sure these people have always been around to some degree, but lately it seems like their knowledge has become a lot more mainstream. Now an LPS monkey could be as rare as a dachshund, or even more so. Seemingly random $5 LPS that no one ever cared about will suddenly shoot up to like $30 overnight, because they're apparently rare and people love rare stuff. They're willing to shell out more money for these pets, bringing and keeping the price up until they lose interest again. And sometimes they don't lose interest. In a lot of cases, I personally believe the rarity doesn't nearly justify the price. Just because something is slightly uncommon doesn't make it automatically worth $50+. In my opinion, almost no LPS is worth that much. Obviously, LPS prices aren't only based on perceived rarity now. Aesthetics still play a huge role in pricing. There's a reason rare, unpopular LPS went up in price, but big fives didn't go down. Sometimes LPS or even whole molds will have huge increases in price because of, from what I can tell, purely aesthetic value. I believe the LPS communities on sites like Instagram and TikTok can have a lot of influence over this. I don't personally use either though, so I can't really comment on it more than that. Good or even decent deals also sell out so quickly now due to the increased interest. Usually the highly priced pets and lots are all that's left if you're not sitting and refreshing eBay 24/7. This, combined with the random price spikes, can, in my experience at least, make it much harder to make good decisions with buying LPS. Do you leave a mid-deal alone, or do you bite the bullet and buy the pet because there's a big chance you'll be kicking yourself when the price has risen even more? And what if someone else buys the pet while you're thinking it over? You gotta buy it now! And of course there's also people just being impatient and paying extra to have a pet right now rather than waiting for a possible better deal. And on the other side of things we have the the sellers. As LPS have become more and more popular to collect, sellers have been marking up their prices seemingly en masse. There have always been sellers who know the market and the value of LPS, and I'm sure they're having a ball, but it seems like more and more people are selling with the express intention of profiting, which sounds obvious and a bit stupid, but there's always been this other demographic of people just selling old crap they don't want anymore, not bothering to learn what everything's worth and how to get the most money possible. Probably someone's mom. The knowledge that LPS can be worth decent money seems to have breached containment more than it had before. They're vintage now, I guess. So it seems to me at least that a lot more people are aware of what they could make from selling, in theory at least. Instead of underpricing, the more uninformed people tend to overprice. They see a specific pet selling for $30 or $50 or $100 and assume they could sell any pet for that much. They still don't understand worth, but in the opposite way. I see this especially in lots, like 5 common pets for $100. Yay! And sometimes clueless or impatient buyers will come along and buy those overpriced lots or pets and reaffirm that those prices are something people can get away with charging. The few sellers who do underprice are more likely than ever to end up finding out their mistake and then naturally relisting with a more correct price. And of course, if this doesn't happen, the listing sells out in a few hours maximum, usually even faster. I also have to imagine that a lot of the good LPS deals that pop up are being bought so quickly by people who intend to resell them. It's probably a lot easier to justify sitting on eBay or Mercari or wherever all day refreshing the page when you think you're going to turn a profit. I'm not here to make a moral judgment on that, that's not the point, but I think it really adds to the fast-paced competitiveness of the LPS market these days. More truly knowledgeable sellers play a big role in price spikes of certain LPS as well. They actually know what's going on with perceived value and price their listings accordingly. Low enough that people will buy, but high enough to be annoying as hell. For instance, some are very quick to put EU exclusive in their listings based on, I assume, information from the collector community or just other listing titles, and then use that to jack up the price a bit. Or a lot. Also, not to put a completely unfounded opinion here, but I really don't think all of these LPS are European exclusives. I think people are a little too quick to call a pet that, but who knows? I don't know. As much as sellers are more literally to blame for the prices, I do feel that the buyers are ultimately more at fault. This is not meant to absolve sellers completely, but the prices they're charging in large part aren't coming from nowhere. Collectors have shown that that's what they're willing to pay, and I guess you could say they're paying the price. With all this in mind, do I see the LPS market quote-unquote crashing in the future? Maybe, but not in the near future, unfortunately. Eventually it probably will to some extent, but that could be a decade from now for all we know. I think there are just too many new people joining the community right now to even think about the inflation truly stopping. I don't know how long this increase will carry on because G7, which I firmly believe is the main thing bringing people in, isn't going anywhere for at least a couple of years. And it'll also obviously have staying power after it's gone, whenever that is. That being said, I do wonder how long the majority of collectors will even be able to afford LPS if the prices continue to rise at this rate. I've already seen people talking about how they can no longer afford to collect, and sadly I imagine that's going to become more and more common. I do wonder how this will affect the LPS market as time goes on. If no one can afford LPS, then the sellers will have no one to cater to, and then what happens? I don't really know what the breaking point would be though in terms of price. If there are these people who can afford to drop $100 on one pet, they clearly have money and are willing to buy for extreme prices. So how bad would things have to get before things would start shifting? Honestly, I think the only thing that would truly bring prices down is just a huge decrease in interest, which sucks because it's very unlikely to happen in any kind of near future. Even if it does happen years and years after G7 is gone or whatever, G2 is only going to get older and harder to find because of that. I don't know if things are ever going to be quite the same. I've never been in any sort of collecting community where this decline has happened though, so I can't really give much insight. If anyone watching this has experienced any sort of big price decline in a collecting community, I would genuinely love to hear about it and your take on the LPS community situation. With that said, I do think there's still at least one thing we as buyers can do to do some damage control and slow the rise a bit. That is just not buying LPS for unreasonable prices. Not very exciting, unfortunately. As I said before, the main reason so many sellers are pricing LPS so high is because so many people are buying them. So don't. Create a budget of how much you're okay with spending on a single pet. Something reasonably low, not like $100, and stick to it. Don't spend an amount you aren't willing to spend semi-frequently because what you spend does have some effect on the general market. Another thing I think is helpful is to just slow down. Don't impulse purchase just because LPS often sell faster now. Actually think about whether or not you really truly want the pet. If there were no perceived time limit, would you still buy that LPS for whatever the price is? If not, don't. If you want to buy some LPS but can't find any listings you're really happy with, then don't settle. Wait and look again later until you find something you'd truly be satisfied with paying for. Yes, you will grow your collection slower by doing these things. Yes, you might sometimes miss out, and yes, it will be harder to get the pets you want when you want them. But ultimately, I do believe it's worth it to keep from feeding into the inflation. No, you can't completely stop it from happening, but I do believe you can slow the rate at which it happens. Maybe not completely on your own, but if more people in the community spend consciously, there can be actual change. Growing your collection will also be a hell of a lot harder if prices keep rising like this. Also, I think it's worthwhile trying to find ways to engage with LPS other than just buying pets. Assuming you have even 1 or 2 LPS, you could try LPS photography or videography. If you don't have any at all, you could still draw LPS or research whether or not like 30% of all LPS are actually European exclusives. I don't think they are! Even if prices get so bad I can never afford another LPS, I can still make videos like I always have. I do realize this won't work for everyone. Most of the things I mentioned are creative hobbies, and I know not everyone is interested in that sort of thing. And for some people, collecting is going to be the only thing they want to do, and I respect that. I just think it's worth considering as collecting becomes less and less accessible. In conclusion, LPS prices are bad because of many reasons that are all related to supply and especially demand, and they will probably get worse before they get better. If they get better at all. The main thing you can do is try to slow things down by not contributing, by not buying at these ridiculous prices. Apologies if this video wasn't very interesting to some of you. I realize that most of my subscribers aren't here for me talking about this sort of thing, and I honestly prefer it that way, but I just felt the need to talk about this because it's been bothering me for a while. Goodbye, and have a day.